All right, welcome. Hope this is a informative and helpful video. Not planning to do any gameplay in this video. We're just going to be talking about Blue Belcher or Tamishi Belcher and how it works, why it works, and we're going to walk through some sideboarding plans. People are often looking for a sideboard guide. Although I find them to be helpful, they are just a guide, not a strict set of rules. And so we're going to talk about a little bit of the strategy behind why why the sideboarding plan, and not just in and out numbers. Although we'll go through the in and out numbers that are in my sideboard guide. So there is a primer linked. What that is just a document with a bunch of text data, although I'm going to be covering a bunch of that here in the video. And then in that there's a sideboard guide. There's also a Discord linked, and you can join that and ask questions and talk to people who have been playing this deck for months and months, and people who have won RCQs and won challenges and gone 9-0 or 10-0 or 8-0 in big tournaments. We have a lot of experience, and people really just looking to help each other out and encourage and challenge each other. So it's a great community to join if you're interested. If you're watching my videos, please consider subscribing. It's fun, it's helpful. Leave me a comment, encourage, hit the like button, smash it, as they say. I appreciate that. But we'll go ahead and do a quick walkthrough of the deck list. We're going with kind of the base set list. I always like to kind of innovate, change out a card here and there, add a few things main. I like playing some Harbinger main. I like keeping the Commandeer main. I'll talk about that. So I'll start with that. Cards that you can play around with as far as the main deck numbers. These four here. We'll make a little separate pile, but I do like Pact of Negation main. I do think it is worth it. I think the Commandeer main is just a great gotcha card and can really flip some matches around. Some turn one game ones can be won with it that you wouldn't win otherwise. That's the main here. The fourth Tamishi is another card you can consider. These could be the cards you could cut for other options. If you're taking these cards out, you should be bringing in. I mean, Harbinger is a card that can win games on its own, so that is a decent bring in. Or you got to bring in some other form of interaction. People have tried things like Spell Snare main. You've seen Force Negation main. Subtlety could be main. Enable Scream is another one. We'll talk about that because we're going to be sideboarding it in a lot. Those are the main cards right now. The other thing people, Waterlog Teachings is a powerful card because with Tamishi and Bloom on turn 4, we can make 14 mana. 15 technically, but with 14 mana, we have enough mana to cast Teachings for Whir for Belcher and win. You need 7 mana for Belcher win. You need 10 mana for Whir Belcher win, and then 14 mana gets you the Teachings plus Whir Belcher win. And because we can get that with any way, either a suspended or word for Bloom, and then a Tamishi on turn 4 with a Whir in hand, we can get the win. It is a powerful card, but we really want to keep our 2 drops high, and usually the cuts for it are either Jawari or Baying Veil. And by cutting 2 drops, we end up making our shoals a little worse. And so right now, the stock list is a 3-1 split. I've gone up to a 1 Jawari 3 Waterlog split, or sometimes even cut Jawari completely. I like Veil over Jawari on average just because I find the -2 all creatures to be better than the 4 spike. But that's another thing you play around with. But these 8 are pretty much locked. At least 2 Tamishis pretty much locked. It's just so powerful. I've won because of the draw card before as well. Being able to pick up a Seagate Restoration has won me games. Being able to pick up Synchronous Super has won me games. And just generating the mana and has won me a game before that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So I think he's very powerful. 2 or 3 for sure. I mean, I like running the 4, and then usually you're sideboarding one of them out. But those are the cards you kind of play well with. If you're playing Lotus Bloom, you want all 4. We need to have all 4 Belcher before sideboard. For Whir, I think the 4 Flare main are pretty stock, as well as the Shoal. There could be a world where we cut some Flare in the main deck. And that's a world where we really want more Force or Subtleties, I think, if those become better in Modern. But right now, having the really flexible answer to everything is best. So that's the deck list. a brief, how does the deck work? If you're new, pretty much we're trying to cast and activate Goblin Char Belcher. It reveals our whole deck because we don't play a single land card in the deck, although we have many lands. All our lands on the front side are not lands, and so we reveal the whole deck, deal a bunch of damage, usually like 40, and win. All our lands are what's called MFDCs, multi-faced double card, so it's 2 cards, it has 2 faces, it only shows the front face, but we can play the back face, which is always a land. So we have 12 of the lands that do 3 damage just to come untapped, we have 12 lands that come in tapped. This is all the untapped blue lands that exist that are MFDCs. There are other tapped blue lands, but we play the blue-white one, even though the front side of it is useless. Both being a 5-drop is pretty useless, and it all it does is tap creatures at sorcery speed. But we need it because we want to be able to activate Tamishi. Is why we want the white source, and then we have the blue-black one because it's can search up any instant or card with flash, which includes Whir, which is a instant, and it's another way of getting Belcher or Bloom into play. Lotus Bloom is our only ramp card, but paired with Tamishi, there's like a mini combo, if you aren't familiar with it. Tamishi's second ability, activated ability, is X and 1 white, returns a land, and then return a land to hand, and then return an artifact or enchantment from the graveyard to play. And so for 1 white, we can return Bloom to play from the graveyard and bounce a land to hand. Because we sack the Bloom for 3 mana and it returns for 1, we effectively add 2 mana per land. And in this deck, we're also returning lands that become spells. So sometimes we can generate a bunch of mana to cast Seagate Restoration as a fun line. It also lets us sometimes pick up a Sink into Stupor we had to play as a land, to then bounce something like a Pithing Needle that's on Goblin Char Belcher or a Flute or something like that. But yeah, Lotus Bloom and Tamishi's great. He also draws a card the first time he does that each turn, which is nice. So that mini combo allows us to ramp, get enough mana to cast and activate Char Belcher. If we just have Bloom and 4 lands, we can win on turn 4. Bloom comes off suspend on turn 4, and then we have 4. If we have an untapped land on turn 4, then we can Belcher and activate. In order to get Whir for Belcher, like I said earlier, you need 10 mana. But with Tamishi and Lotus Bloom, even with just 3 lands in play on turn 4, we can do that as well. Without Tamishi, we also can just Whir for Lotus Bloom on turn 3 on their end step, and then untap and have 7 mana for Belcher on turn 4. Just quick, if you have both Tamishi and Whir and a Belcher in hand, go ahead and Whir for Bloom first. A couple reasons for this. 1, you get to do it on their end step. There's less interaction. 2, it makes sure you'll actually get an activation of Tamishi. So if you cast Tamishi on your turn, pass. He has to survive the whole turn, come back, and then you get the Bloom and start going off, so to speak. Because Tamishi and Whir both cost 3 mana, you're like, well, why does it matter? Well, by doing the instant speed one first, you kind of protect your Tamishi. You cast Tamishi for 3. You have Bloom. You sack it. You can activate. You can sack it for white and then activate his ability, and they can respond to the activation, but you'll get at least 1 activation. So you'll get to draw a card. You'll get the Bloom back into play, and you'll get to bounce 1 land. Whereas if you played Tamishi first, he could just be killed before it gets back to your turn, and you won't get to use him at all, and you won't get to draw that extra card. Thunder Traps, and Philology can hit everything in the deck except for each other, Tamishi, and then the Hydroelectric Specimen. It is a bummer that one of our untapped sources is a creature. I have flipped it often with Philology when I need a creature, or when I need a land and I can't pick it up, which is, bummer. But like I said, these are all the untapped sources we want to play them, because we often want untapped on turn 3 for this or this, and then untapped on turn 4 for this. And obviously once we play these 2 drops, especially, they are all fodder for Flare of Denial, which we can sack them to cast it for free. Our shoals are free, and we are most of the time free, and we're usually exiling either a 2 or 3 drop. Those are the most common ones we're exiling in this deck to counter opponents' spells, although sometimes we counter a 7 drop. Commandeer is another free counter spell, but it steals a spell, notably very good against opposing Karns. If we face any Karn deck, make sure to move one of your Belchers to the sideboard, but we'll talk about that. And then packs are another free counterspell. We also pay for packed a non-zero amount of times, and sometimes you do have to sack a bloom to pay for packed, and when you do that, just make sure you put the pack trigger on the stack first and then blow this bloom, so you cast the bloom, can sack it for mana, and then pay for packed. I've done that multiple times as well. We also oftentimes can use pack to defend our combo, where we're not killing that turn, but then we untap, put the pack trigger on the stack, and then activate Belcher and kill him before we lose. A few kind of tips and tricks there. And remember that Sink into Stupor is a catch-all to hit any of their hate. And we can pick it up with Tamishi. So, on to sideboarding. I'm going to be following the sideboard guide that is linked, but we'll just go through some of the most popular matchups. So, Jeskai. Against Jeskai, we are going to cut 2 Lotus Bloom. We're going to cut 2 Charbelchers. And we're going to cut 2 Tamishi. And you'll notice that against basically pretty much any blue deck, we're cutting 2 Bloom, 2 Belchers. And we're often cutting Tamishi as well. And it might feel kind of like, why would we be cutting, some of our best cards, right? Like, we need Belcher to win. Why would we cut down on those? And I guess the shortest way to explain why is we never want a separate, we don't really ever want a second copy of Charbelcher. We just want to be able to protect it. We're not trying to set up, Jeskai does pressure our life total more than like a traditional blue-white control deck does, but it isn't killing us by turn 4 or 5, and so we have time to set up a turn where we're casting our Belcher or our Whir, and we're defending it with our counter magic. Because we don't really have to use our counter magic proactively to stop ourselves from dying in this matchup. We can wait to use it on a turn where we're going to win. And so you're sculpting a turn against Jeskai control to win. So that is why we sideboard this way. A Whir is much easier to defend. Multiple reasons. When cast on their end step, we can use our Force Negation to defend it, which is nice. They can't use their Force Negations, which they likely are playing 4 of, on their turn. And so it's much better to go for Whir than Belcher. Whirs are blue, which means we can discard them to Shoal, Force Negation, or Commandeer, so they're better to keep in than Belchers. And then again, Blooms, it's like, yes, setting up for turn 4 kill is nice, but a lot of times a turn 4 kill is very hard to defend, unless we've played a creature, have a Flare, and have a Pact in hand or whatever. Where we're more likely to be winning on turn 5, 6, or 7 in this matchup. So we want a density of cards that interact with the opponent. Tamishi is another one where he doesn't really interact with the opponent. We don't ever really want to draw more than one of them. They likely went down on creature removal, so he's more likely to survive. And so what do we bring in? We're bringing in the second Commandeer. Commandeer is great when we're interacting on the stack. Against the stack, you can steal counter spells, which is great. Yeah, not much else to say there. Then we're bringing in Harbingers. This is because they aren't playing a lot of basics, and although Harbinger keeps all their counter magic on, it basically turns off their clock. So I have won probably, I don't know, more than half of my matches against Jeskai control. I've won with a Harbinger, just beating them down in game 2 or 3. Because once this is in play, they don't really have any way to interact with it unless they had a basic mountain in play or basic plains. And so often we get to play a Harbinger and then maybe play an Otter or whatever and play a Philagi and not pick up a card and just beat them down with it while holding a bunch of counter magic, and they're holding a bunch of counter magic. If you watch through my playlist, you'll see this happen multiple times. Mystical Disputes are obviously great against blue decks. Force Negation is obviously great at protecting our spells. And don't forget that you can cast Force, you can cast Flare. At 3 mana, they're just cancels. This also exiles a card, which can be relevant as well. So that's our plan against Jeskai. And we'll go ahead and de-sideboard before going to the next matchup, or else I think it will get confusing to follow. Next one, talk about Boros Energy, one of the most popular decks. This one is, looks very different. We're taking out the Flare of Denials. We're taking out our Commandeer and our Pact of Negation. And a couple reasons. So Flare in this matchup ends up being one of our worst counter spells because we don't really want to sack our creatures. We want them to sit there and soak up damage. Even Thunderclap is great. It can kill their cat, their ocelots, and can block their guide until it gets flying. In worst case, we're just throwing it in front of a raptor for a turn. Flogy can block most things in their deck. If you don't take a card as a 1/4, it can kill a lot of the things in their deck because it kills Ragavan and the Raptor, as well as the cat and the tokens. So we don't really want to sack him to Flare. Also, it's slow because this means we have to have cast a 2-drop, it still be in play, which means we bolted ourselves for it turn 2, and then we hold up Flare. But instead, we bring in things like Spell Snare, our Unable to Screams, of course, and our Portable Hole. And then you can bring in the Force Negation or a Harbinger. You can also maybe bring in 2 Harbinger if you want to cut more. Cut a Tamishi, although, again, creatures are very good in this matchup. We want to keep our Lotus Blooms because we do really want to win on turn 4. Going slower is not ideal. And like I said, I kind of like the Harbinger. Sometimes you can catch them unaware, but there's also some precedent for playing Force because they're playing things like Flute and Blood Moon and other needle effects. But the Unable to Screams are very good. You want to target stuff like Ocelot, Guide, and Ragavan, and Ajani with this. You're hopefully not using it on something like the Raptor, that we can block with this or this, And so the ideal play is like you have a turn 1 or 2, you're playing an untapped land for either this or Spell Snare. You also have Portable Hole as a whir target that you can cast to deal with a flute or something like that. But yeah, the other thing is our shoals, right, are better with a bunch of 1-drops in the deck. So now we have some 1-drops, we still have all our 2-drops. We didn't cut any 2-drops, we cut 3 and 0, right? In order to make our shoals better. And Snare, hits basically everything that matters in their deck as a 1-minute answer, so very powerful here. That's Boros Energy. Bring this back in. Oh, I think I brought an extra Commandeer in. Nope, I didn't. It's right here. Okay. Ruby Storm. This one's pretty basic. This one we're taking out flares again. Because Storm is killing us on turn 3, we sometimes don't have time to play a creature out and turn this on. Cut one of our Tamishis. We like to be fast, but we keep him 1 counter spell, which is nice. We're just bringing in, our more efficient counter magic. Again, Spell Snare is great against their deck. Force is great against their deck. Commandeer is basically just a worse force here. These, notably, you can use these on Ruby itself. Otherwise, you have to make sure you know what you're doing. If you don't know how Ruby Storm plays, watch some of their videos, and then you'll learn what to counter. But Spell Snare, like I said, hits everything that matters in their deck. Watch out. You can't just hold your counter magic up until they go for the win or the wish, or because they often will play an Orm's Chant and force you to just waste your counter on that, because once it resolves, you can't resolve a counter spell. So use it proactively. Try to tag their Ruby and Ral, and then after that, try to hit their Passive Flames or their Wish. Don't let them resolve that. But you can obviously just snare the first ritual, and that's usually good enough. That's good enough when they're going for a turn 3 kill, often. But later in the game, you got to be smart about what you counter. And again, you're trying to keep a hand that goes for the win on turn 4 or 5 at the latest. Don't keep hands that have 0 interaction. It's not a good enough game plan, even if it's a perfect combo hand against that deck. Oh, sorry, I gotta do this a little better here. My flares back over here, Tamishi here. Goryo's Vengeance. Similar to other blue decks, we're cutting 2 Lotus, we're cutting 2 Belcher for the same reason we did. Actually, I only need 1 Belcher cut here. And then we cut the Commandeer, and a Tamishi. See, we often go down to 3. You know, the 3 is pretty ideal for a legendary. You know, we're kind of all in before sideboard. But here we bring in the Harbingers. We bring in the Spell Snares because they hit a lot of what we want to hit in this deck. And then we bring in our Mysticals because the blue cards are the ones that stop us most of the time. Unfortunately, we don't have like a great answer to hand hate, and they often are playing Thoughtseize, but Harbinger can really shut off everything that they care about in their deck. Spell Snare hits Goryos. It's the main reason to play it. It often hits. It also hits Counterspell, which they're usually playing. Faithful Mending, the Emperor Bones, right? And then Dispute hits. They're usually playing some number of Force Negation, as well as maybe Counterspell and other stuff like that. Just put these here for now. Living End, a little different, but we're still doing the 2 Lotus here, and a Commandeer, a Disrupting Shoal, and a Tamishi. So the difference here is Shoal is actually worse on average than Pact or Flare, because the only way to counter Living End is to have a Pact in hand with Shoal. Well, not the only way. You can pay 2 mana to use Shoal to counter Living End, so don't forget that. This works as a counterspell against 0 mana spells. But we get to bring in our Consigns here. We get to bring in our Force and our Mystical Dispute. This not only hits their counter magic, but they also have that 4 mana blue card that lets them cast Living End. Consign, obviously, maybe not obviously, but hits the Cascade trigger, so you can turn off the ability to get Living End, and you can replicate it, and that is your great answer to their combo that they can't even interact with. Red-Green Breach, or Gruul, as some would call it. 1 second. Apologize if that was loud. We take out a Bloom. We take out a couple Shoal. We take out Pact Negations and a Tamishi. Where's my extra Tamishi? So again, the reason we're taking out Shoals here is that Red-Green Breach cares about 5 drops and 4 drops, and we don't really have 5 and 4 drop cards, right? We only have a few over here to pitch to it, and so Shoal is one of our weaker ones. Packs are pretty weak too. We don't want to die. They're often, going off on turn 3 or 4. We don't always have the mana to pay for it, and they aren't really interacting with us on our turn typically, as far as interacting with our combo. So we go just down the 1 Bloom because we do, in 1 Belcher, we don't cut any Belcher because they're not a blue deck. You could maybe cut just the 3rd Pact. You could just cut all the Shoals maybe if you wanted to keep in a Tamishi and a Bloom and still kind of be all in on racing them. This is kind of splitting the difference between cutting things that are bad for things that are better, and still remaining pretty all in on the combo. But you bring in Harbinger, maybe not obvious, but Consign and Harbingers are kind of our houses in this matchup. Force and then the other Commandeer are good as well. This is because obviously these hit the spell through the Breach, and that's the one we care about the most. You also can Commandeer. Some of these lists play Karn. A lot of them play Ring. You can Commandeer the Ring. It's a great one to get. Yeah. I don't think there's really much else to say there. If they're playing Karn, always sideboard out 1 Belcher, in which case I would probably keep in the Shoal, or keep in the Bloom, or keep in one of my Packs or Shoal. You can decide which one you want. Domain Zoo. I'm going to go ahead and keep these Harbingers in. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to I would completely sideboard, but I'm not this time. Deal with it. So you bring in Harbinger and you bring in Unable to Scream. Obviously, Harbinger is great against a deck trying to have 5 land types. Unable to Scream makes their Scions and Kavus into O2s. Really powerful. Obviously, you can't do this if they have Scion plus Leyline, so be wary of that. We take out Disrupting Shoals. So wait, sorry, we're keeping in our Packs. we're keeping in, we're cutting our Commandeer and our shoals completely. Should look like that. Let's double check. So we cut 4 shoal and a Commandeer. We brought in 4 and 2. Oh, we want to keep the Lotus Bloom. Sorry, you can cut a Tamishi or a Belcher. It's hard because so Tamishi blocks. Obviously, having Belchers makes more density at winning. I like cutting a Tamishi. That also puts us down on blue cards a little bit. But because we cut our shoals, right? We cut shoals because they're playing a 12 drop on turn 2, right? We can't even counter Scion with it, so it's useless against some of their main game plans, which is like Guild Pact, Leyline and Guild Pact into Scions and Leyline Bindings. We can't hit either. We have no 6 drops, so Enabled Screams are great. Harbingers are great. Should make sense there. Then go ahead and do Amulet Titan here. I guess going through this each time maybe it doesn't make all the sense in the world, but we're gonna do it. We cut our packs, we cut our shoals. You might be like, why? These are, fast counters. It's like, well, we can't really shoal their amulets, and we can't really shoal their titans, and those are the cards we care about the most. And packs often aren't good enough. We get to bring in consigns, which hit both their titan triggers and their amulets, as well as some other spells in their deck. Force and Commandeer again. We can Commandeer away an amulet on turn 1, which is fine. We can Commandeer away their ability to cast extra or make extra lands. Don't take their Summoner's Pact. That's a bad plan, but you can force that. Yeah, it should be pretty self-explanatory. Keep a hand that can interact. Again, if you don't have any consign and you don't have any, flare and you don't have Harbinger, you're probably mulling unless, if it's a perfect turn 4 win, with Tamishi, and Belcher and a Bloom, like maybe you hope that they kept a slower hand, but I think in this is another matchup where you want to keep a hand that can interact. Then go ahead and sideboard. I'm sure there's a button I could click to just undo it. Dimir Frog. Now this matchup has changed. So I'll go through that here, but we're cutting 2 Bloom and 2 Belcher. We're also cutting 2 Tamishi. Oh, did I leave one over here? I lost my Tamishi. Where could he be? He's up here. There is some precedent for maybe cutting a Commandeer, but I think I like keeping it. We keep in our packs, keeping our flares, keeping our shoals, and we're going to bring in our Force Negation for sure, and our Spell Snares, and our Mystical Disputes for sure. Then there's one more. You can bring in Commandeer, maybe. You can bring in Consign, maybe. I like bringing in some number of Scream. And I think that this changes now against the Unearthed Oculus deck. I think we want all the Scream in. I think we actually don't need the Disputes. The Oculus deck is playing less counter magic and more discard, and then they have the Unearthed. So we need more 1 mana things for Shoal. We need to be able to hit Oculus because it kills us fast. And Spell Snares actually get notably worse. Sorry. Spell Snares, I think, is what we cut. Keeping Disputes. Maybe some form of that. And again, there might be people who disagree or do it slightly differently. I think that that's the best way to navigate that because of Oculus now. The deck changed quite a bit. A lot more 1-drops and less interaction in general, but they kill faster. We do still care about Frog, that's why you want a Spell Snare. And then the Belcher Mirror, and this is one that's like people have gone back and forth. Some of it does depend on what people are playing. People have put different things in their sideboard. And for the most part, like other blue decks, you're cutting Bloom, you're cutting Belcher, and you're cutting some Tamishi. And sometimes you can cut some shoals. I think you want to keep this. You maybe cut some packs, but again, you want as much free interaction as possible. And you get to bring in your force, commandeer, bring in your consigns. Unless they're a memory list, if they're playing selected memory, but this still can hit Thassa's Oracle on that. Just, and then you bring in Mystical Dispute. Where's the other one? I want it to look something like that. So, yeah, I think it's pretty much always like that. Snare only hits cards we don't really care about as far as the 2 mana creatures. So for this list, how it's built, this is how you'd want to go. One thing to keep in mind is typically whoever goes for the combo first loses. So it's kind of a patient game. That being said, your otters might end up being very important, or your Tamishi, because there might just be a lot of combat damage happening while you're both sitting there with the hands full of counter magic. But yeah, in testing, that's what I've been told by people in the Discord, and my personal experience is don't be the person who goes for it first. There's always a caveat, though, which is like sometimes you might just go for the win on turn 4 and only have a pact negation, and that's all you need. But because of the presence of Commandeer especially, and because Belcher is a win for both decks, if they're worrying for Belcher or casting Belcher and you can Commandeer it and then fight over that, that's ideal. Obviously, they are probably bringing in the same cards. They probably have Commandeers, they probably have Consigns, they likely have disputes or some sort of counter magic spell. They might be playing something like a Flusterstorm, Spell Pierce. They might be playing more forces. So just keep that in mind. They might be playing a Mind Grind, so you have to just watch out. Just be careful. Always hold up interaction. But there you go. There's your sideboard guide. Let me know if you have any questions, if there's a matchup in particular. Keep in mind, this is all based off of kind of like what I would call a stock list, but I like to change up my 75 pretty much every league, and it's fine if you do too. And so, if you've changed up your sideboard, the ideas behind what you cut and what you bring in stay the same, right? So if I don't have spell snares and instead have spell pierces, well, I'm still in a lot of matchups, I'm bringing in spells pierce against those blue decks instead of spell snare. Or, if I cut the dispute and I'm playing a Flusterstorm in place of one and another Commandeer in place of this, well, I'm still bringing them in a lot of the same places, but sometimes I might not want that other Commandeer, but I'll want that Flusterstorm, right? So I might throw off some of the numbers, and that's fine. So that means I'm keeping in another Tamishi or keeping in an extra Pact or Flare in some of the matchups. Yeah, and I think I explained cutting Bloom and Belcher, going down on non-blue cards, non-interactive cards, because we're not really looking for more win cons, and just Whir is a much more defensible win con, and forces them to have it on their turn and lets us, then act with them having tapped mana on our turn. But I hope this was helpful. Let me know, and have a fantastic evening.